Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to the final installment in the worst to best boss fight series. We have looked at the low tier boss fights, we have looked at the mid tier boss fights, and today we are looking at the best of the best, the top high tier boss fights found within Ultimate Alliance 3. As a reminder to any of you watching this, these lists are based 100% on my opinion. That being said, I do enjoy listening to the thoughts and constructive input from those of you who enjoy watching these videos. So I'm not going to drag on with this any longer. We have 13 boss fights left to order, and we're going to jump right into that. But as we do, make sure you check to see if you're subscribed to the channel. If you're not, please take a moment and fix that, as the subscription is free, easy, and I bring videos to you from many different game types and varieties on a daily basis. So let's jump into the high tier rankings of the boss fights within Ultimate Alliance 3. Coming in at spot number 13, we have the fight against Green Goblin. Now, Ultimate Alliance has this trend throughout the game in its entirety of introducing you to the different Infinity Stones in interesting and quirk-based fights. And the most difficult of those fights, outside of recollecting the Infinity Stones from the Black Order in the Boss Rush Gauntlet at the end of the story quest, is, in my opinion, the fight against Green Goblin. And the reason that I say this is, Green Goblin, yes, he does abuse quite heavily and drastically that mechanic of using the time stone to pause the action, especially when you get into the second half of that fight. But in addition to that, he really kind of hammers home the chaos that can be unleashed with that stone, especially where he wanders around to different parts of the battlefield and arena. It can be a little bit difficult to layer into him with the bombs that he throws out, and you have to really make sure that you're lining up those throws correctly and timing them to make sure that he doesn't zip away from the area where he's just been stationed, in order to allow you to land a clean hit on him as you throw those projectiles back at him. So yes, it's quite challenging, especially for newer players. It can take quite some time to figure out and make sure that you do it correctly and properly. And he takes up a lot of space in addition to being agile. So that's why I feel that he deserves spot number 13 and the bottom placement on the high tier boss fight characters. Coming in at spot number 12, we have Proxima Midnight, and this is the Proxima Midnight from the boss rush at the end of the game. Now, she doesn't miss her attacks very frequently, if at all, and that can be quite frustrating, especially because she does hit decently hard. The reason that she comes in as low on this tier as she does is she does summon in a horde of Outriders, so there are methods that can be used to replenish your energy points and even your health over the course of this fight. So it's not the end-all be-all, but it certainly knocks her down a couple of rungs on this particular ranking. She does still hit very hard and has a lot of range, as well as the ability to use the Space Stone to her advantage to suck you in closer and land some devastating hits on the members of your team. So you do want to be overly cautious when facing off against Proxima Midnight. Coming in at spot number 11, we have Corvus Glaive. Again, this is from the end boss rush of the members of the Black Order. Corvus, he is quite a nuisance to fight against, though he hits significantly less hard in this environment than he does in previous fights that you have against him. He still summons in his reality clones, which do his dirty work, though they are significantly weaker in terms of the overall health pools that they have. They are still very annoying, especially when they summon in either on the outskirts or the center of the arena and offer their 180-degree turn of sending out the energy blasts or energy waves across the arena. Additionally, Corvus has this really bad habit of jumping up into the sky for about 20 to 30 seconds and raining glaives back down onto the battlefield, which really kind of slows down the flow of this fight as he's nowhere near. He's the only boss that really completely leaves and is impervious to damage in the entirety of the run. Even you can administer some subtle chip damage to some of the other boss fights in the game when they do enter more of an invulnerability state. Here, he's completely absent for that 20 to 30 seconds, which makes things a little bit more technical in addition to the other mechanics that we've already talked about. Coming into the top 10 positions, we have Supergiant. And the reason that Supergiant is here is she blinks all over the place. I didn't think that I would find someone more annoying than Tracer from Overwatch, but Supergiant, she is in and out, she's here, she's there, and there's not really a good way to get a track on where she's going to end up when she teleports and blinks out of the way. And it's really not a fun mechanic to deal with, and on top of that, she also has the access to the Mind Stone and different orbs and other attacks that will confuse and disorient the members of your team, which makes the fight that much more difficult and annoying. But as long as you get an idea for how she blips around the battlefield and try and notice her tells for when she is going to do so, the fight gets a little bit easier, but it does have a pretty significant learning curve to it to get to the point where you fully understand the way that the fight with this character works. Coming in at spot number 9, we have the endgame fight against Obsidian. And this is up here because, of course, Obsidian has access to the Power Stone. So he hits very, very hard. And he also has large energy projectiles that take up a large portion of the battlefield and deal massive amounts of damage. He does summon in a couple of projectile explosives when he jumps around the arena, but those really don't do a whole lot when it comes to breaking down his stagger gauge or dealing additional damage to him. So he definitely has earned his spot atop the ranking of the Black Order fights, though there are still other fights in the game that I personally feel are more difficult than the one against him. Coming in at spot number 8 was probably not a fight that you were expecting to see, but it very much deserves its way on to this list where it is. This is specifically the fight against Mystique, Juggernaut, and Magneto right when you get through the Infinity Sentinel fight. These three characters hit very hard. They tag team into each other quite a bit, and especially if it's one of your first runs through the game, you're not going to be able to take one, if any of them, out. You do need to take at least one of them out to progress through, or just throw the fight by letting your characters go down. And that's a pretty tall task. As a matter of fact, with this fight, in any speedrun with the exception of New Game Plus, your best bet is to just throw all of your characters in front of the heaviest hitting character, whether that be Juggernaut or Magneto, and letting them just sweep through your team to force that transition into the next section, as this is a fight that's designed to the point where you're not supposed to win it. You can, but you're definitely not meant to. And because of that, it's earned a place high in the tier of high-tier boss fights, though again, not quite rounding into the top half of said fights. Coming in at spot number 7, we have the Surter fight. This is a very infuriating fight when you initially look at it. There are a couple of tips and tricks that you can pick up on to get through this fight a little more consistently, one of which is Hulk tears through Surter, especially with his charge ability, which you want to use just on its own. You can shred through his stagger bar and really push this fight along. But if you don't have Hulk on your team or a character who has a similar charge type ability, you're going to be here for a minute. And Surter can't be damaged in the first phase of the fight as it takes place in Hell. That's where you need to really ramp in as much damage as you can to deplete his stagger gauge, but if you let up for too long, he will replenish that gauge and you'll be right back to where you started, minus the energy points that you had expelled to lower that previously. So the first phase is initially difficult, but the second phase doesn't get a whole lot easier because yes, you are able to deal damage to him once you get him up to the Bifrost, but his attacks take up the entire area where you are standing, whether it be the bursts of magma type energy that he summons onto the Bifrost Bridge, or the long sweeping lashes with his sword from side to side across the bridge, or my least favorite of all the attacks that he chooses to throw out, the repeated slams down onto the Bifrost, which he does many in quick succession, one after the other, which will not only deal a pretty decent amount of damage, but it will significantly slow down the pace of you being able to take on this fight. Surter has very much earned his position up here in the high tier boss fights. Spot number 6 belongs to Dormammu, and he's not a very difficult fight once you understand what's going on. The problem is it might take a minute to understand what's going on and then navigate it correctly. The whole premise of this fight revolves around supercharging some of the energy crystals and throwing them into Dormammu's face or into his protective shield to either beat down the protection that he has, blast through his stagger gauge, or deal damage directly to him. But that's kind of where this takes a different turn, because there are many of the mindless ones that are summoned in that are going to do everything they can to get you to drop those crystals and drag this fight on longer than it otherwise needs to be. Additionally, not all of the attacks that are being thrown out during this fight fall into that energy category. If you get hit by any of the ice elemental attacks that are coming through from the arcane artifacts, you'll get knocked down and thus lose your crystal. There's a lot of attacks done by the mindless ones that will cause you to lose that same charged crystal. And there are also attacks from Dormammu himself, whether it be him beating down onto the arena with his fist at the end of a stagger animation, or if it's summoning in the large orbs that come in from overhead onto the battlefield as well. And not the flame orbs, because those ones can still be absorbed by the energy crystals. There's also 2 attacks that he does where he kind of summons up some pillars or some spires from underfoot, and you need to make sure you can recognize the difference between the 2, because one of them can be used to charge the energy crystals, the other will knock you flying up into the air and cause you to drop that energy crystal as well. And if you're not careful in that last little sliver of his health, you can get stuck in a position where there are no more mindless ones spawning in, and you might have to reset the boss fight in order to fully run through that due to the lack of energy crystals that you have to break down his barrier and get through the remainder of that fight. So with a couple of minor technicalities and just the sheer amount of battlefield awareness that is required for this fight, Dormammu has hedged his way into the number 6 spot in the boss fight ranking difficulties. In spot number 5, we have the conflict against Doctor Strange. And this one is a run killer for many a player, because I see in forums all over the place, whether it's a Reddit forum, Facebook conversation, or even some of the speedruns that I myself have participated in, Doctor Strange seems to be the bottleneck for a lot of different people and a real skill check, if we're being honest. Now, the first part of his fight isn't that bad. It's actually quite easy to get through. But when he resets with the imbuement from Dormammu, he becomes a lot more chaotic and a lot more difficult to take on. He summons in large amounts of flaming energy, which includes the bolts of Balthek upgraded to be kind of paralleled with the flames of the Faltine, which deal massive amounts of damage, stagger you, and kind of get you trapped in that. You can just be completely melted through your entire health bar if you stumble into that attack. He also has the flame charge that he will send out in waves out in front of him, or will summon down from up above. And additionally, there are arcane artifacts that kind of throw you off this as well, as they will rain down either fire blasts, lightning bolts, or again, those ice crystals. And they can be taken out, but they reappear fairly quickly, so it's almost not worth the time, and you just want to make sure that you are very familiar with how to dodge and roll out of the way of the attacks that Doctor Strange is sending your way, and just kind of make sure that you are constantly vigilant about where you are, what attack Doctor Strange is about to put out, and how the health for the rest of your team is looking as well. This is a very noteworthy fight, and holistically belongs here at spot number 5. Spot number 4 on our list belongs to Thane. This is the end-all, be-all fight at the culmination of the main story quest. And this, again, is where everything comes to a head. You need to take Thane on as he builds his arsenal of using the different Infinity Stones to his advantage within this fight. And just when you think the fight's over, he summons in that last Soul Stone, and you have to fight him with all of his abilities intact. He has large hitboxes that will blast a massive section of the battle arena with the Power Stone. He has the Space Stone, which will teleport you in from different periods around the fight. He has the Time Stone, which will kind of freeze you in place anytime he comes out of a stagger animation. He also has the Reality Stone, where he'll summon in clones of himself. He also uses that Space Stone to beckon you in and bring you closer. And worst of all, he has this Amber attack, where he will encase you in a brick or a block of amber, and you have to mash for everything that you're worth to get out of that, lest you suffer massive amounts of damage from Thane as he throws this out. I haven't ever lost a speedrun to this fight in particular, but I have come very, very close. And the sheer amount of technicality that goes into this and the apex spatial awareness that is required for this fight certainly puts him up towards the top of this list, but not quite in the top 3, because I do feel like there are still a few fights that have an edge over him. But before we get into the top 3, there is one honorable mention fight that I need to throw out. Now, I could not include this in the rankings overall of the fight based off of the premise that I set up, because these are meant to be fights that take place within a story type quest. And yes, the Shadow of Doom is an extension to that story quest, so those fights have appeared, or some will still appear on this list as we get into the top 3. But we need to take a brief moment and talk about Dark Phoenix. Dark Phoenix is a fight that exists purely within the gauntlets and the danger rooms added with the Rise of the Phoenix DLC, and this is a very harrowing fight. The arena is burning, the arena is burning in any instance where Phoenix is not completely stunned, so your team is taking residual damage as you're ramping through this fight. And she deals high amounts of damage with a lot of her different attacks, where she's rushing out across the battlefield or the battle arena, where she's unleashing her fire blasts, which are in pillars of 3, except for the final attack, which is in one larger burst that takes up about the same amount of area as the 3 bursts. Or in some instances, she has some protective shielding that comes in and really tries to bottleneck you out of finishing out that fight. It gets very hectic and chaotic, and certainly would belong here within the high tier of fights, but because it falls outside the criteria, I can't give it an official ranking, but I wanted to mention it at least from an honorable mention standpoint. We can now move on to spot number 3 on our list, and this goes to the Celestial fight. Now, the Celestial has a lot of chaos that just involves this fight, and that's not even including the travel hazards that you have to go through in multiple iterations, whether it's rolling through the laser blasts, trying to avoid the lightning that comes down, or any of the other attacks that he does while he's just trying to impede you in your progress of getting towards the end of this fight. But we're here to focus specifically on what this fight looks like. Now, fortunately, this balance is tipped a little bit more in your favor due to the presence of the Doombots that have the rockets that you can throw out. But if you are not on top of your game in unleashing that damage and staggering out that Celestial, he will one-shot your entire team with the large blasts and the sweeping blows that he brings down on top of your head. And it is a very brutal learning curve, especially if you're going in blind to this run. If you've seen it done before or you're familiar with the mechanics, you can make your way through it a little bit easier. But he hits very, very hard. And additionally, you need to make sure that you wait for his stagger bar to replenish anytime you weaken him, because if you're not keeping your eye on that stagger bar, it refills and he goes through his recharge animation. He's going to reset all of the damage that you've just done to him, and you need to be pendant and ready to counteract that with the antimatter crystals that are brought in by the summoned insectoids from the negative zone. Otherwise, you're just going to be in a cyclical, downward, spiraling cycle trying to get through this fight, and it's going to take you much longer than it ever reasonably should. So the Celestial fight very much deserves its ranking here at the top of the list, here at spot number 3 in the highest tier of the boss fights within this game. Spot number 2 is probably another fight that you weren't expecting to see here. But this is the fight against Corvus and Proxima at the Xavier Institute. This is another one of those fights that you are not expected or intended to win. And again, unless you're playing in New Game Plus, from a speedrunning standpoint, it is in your best interest to throw this fight as quickly as you can. Let Corvus take out your entire team. Let Corvus and Proxima take out your entire team when they then come together, because you cannot deal any meaningful damage to them. You're just going to be dealing chip damage to them periodically throughout their fight, and their stagger bars hardly move. You are dealing raw damage through the extra protection that is provided to them through their stagger bars, and they hit very hard, especially Corvus whenever he gets into those attacks where either he's hitting you right up close or he's standing on the other side of the arena and spamming those streamlined energy attacks across the way at you. And once you're stuck in those, there's really not a way for you to get out. As a matter of fact, if you are controlling a character that then gets stuck in those attacks and you are trying to get through that fight without dying outright, your best bet is to switch to another character that is not stuck within that to mitigate the damage that your teammate or the character that you were just controlling, to mitigate the damage that they are receiving, and hopefully deal a little bit more damage to either him or to Proxima with the other members of your team until they are released from that chaos that is the attack from Corvus. Again, this is up towards the top of this list because it is not a fight that you are intended to win. But there are a couple of nice perks and in-game surprises that are allotted to you should you be able to defeat them. So if you haven't revisited that fight once you have a higher level team, I would encourage you to do so for the challenge and the additional Easter egg artifacts that will drop upon defeating these characters. And finally, the number 1 spot on our list. Could there be anyone else to top off the list of boss fights than God Emperor Doom? There's not. God Emperor Doom is the final culminating boss fight at the end of the Shadow of Doom DLC, and he maintains a scarily difficult moniker with his fight. Now, even the first phase of his fight is nothing to be overlooked, as he still hits incredibly hard and has the ability to summon that rainbow tornado vortex that comes in and will just rip your team to shreds. It's a very highly intensive fight that you need to make sure that you are on your toes for. Be familiar with and recall back to the other fight that you had with Dr. Doom because he has some very similar tendencies. And be ready to dodge and roll out of the way almost constantly because some of the attacks that he can unleash seriously come out of nowhere. But this fight really gets turned up to 11 when you transition over to the second phase of the fight. As phase 2 starts up, he summons in the holographic Avengers, which I've heard affectionately referred to as the Orange Jello Avengers. And as funny as a name as that is, these characters are anything but. He summons in Iron Man, Captain America, Hulk, and Thor. And they all synergize with each other and with God Emperor Doom during this fight. So you've got large hitboxes being thrown out all the way across the arena from multiple different enemies. It's the close to a one-on-one confrontation that you could ever really arrive, because there's not a whole lot of other instances where you are fighting basically an entire other team of characters that are just as capable of laying you out flat as a pancake as you generally do to the opponents that you are facing off against. And in addition to all of these hitboxes being thrown out and the synergies and the large amount of space that these attacks take up, you can't rule out the fact that Doctor Doom does have an animation where he summons the souls of these holographic Avengers back to him, and if he consumes all 4 of them, much like the Celestial fight before, he will transfigurate into a form that is taller than a mountain and pound down with a massive strike across the entirety of the arena, and one-shot basically your entire team. So this is a very technical, high-demanding fight, and as much as I've said it with other fights before, this is the peak of the prowess of spatial awareness and fine movement, as well as team building and overall damage output, to really make sure that you know what you're doing and you have what it takes to get through this fight. And just like that, we have ranked every single boss fight within Ultimate Alliance 3. As a recap, you are now seeing the full list here on your screen. But let me know what you think. Do you agree with my placements? Do you disagree? Are there any boss fights that you feel like I overestimated or underestimated? Be sure to let me know in the comments down below. And if you found today's video enjoyable, don't forget to leave a like on the video and subscribe for more daily content. Thanks again for your time, and I hope that you have an absolutely fantastic rest of your day.